Our issues, I think, start between the ears when we just have self doubt. Hey, how's it going? My name's Matt Reyes, and I want to say thanks so much for jumping on this marriage podcast. Now, this whole channel is focused around marriages, God centered marriages. Now, my wife and I have been huge advocates for God centered marriages for years. I mean, it started way back almost about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when my wife and I almost got divorced. Um, but through some counseling and encouragement with friends, we're able to power through some of the initial experiences that we had and really just focus in on ourselves and what we had going on that were based on some issues, some, I guess past trauma, past hurt, and focus on really getting our marriage better. And we've come to the realization and to really believe that if you change a marriage, you can change a generation, and that generation changing starts with you. Now, I want to talk specifically to the guys on this one and why marriage, staying married is so hard, and not just staying married and drudging through it, with begrudgingly and like the ball and chain as they call it. It's really about having a marriage that's thriving, because I know there are a lot of marriages out there, but not all of them are thriving. A lot of them make it until death do them part. Some of them don't make it that far. And I believe it's for many different reasons that people call it quits. Everything from money issues, irreconcilable differences, which I think is just a cop out, all the way through to adultery. Now, there are some extreme cases, of course, of abuse, like physical abuse, emotional, mental abuse, verbal abuse. Some of those things, those are just different circumstances that I'm not talking about here today. I'm talking about the issues of pride, ego, selfishness, and some of those reasons are what often make just divorce so trying. So again, not to talk about the really extreme examples of abuse, physical abuse, sexual, verbal, and all those instances, because those are, have different grounds and that's for a different conversation. I'm talking about the vast majority of couples who just have issues between each other. And for many of them, and husbands, our issues, I think, start between the ears when we just have self doubt, when we have just issues that arose and really got cemented or rooted when we were kids, and things that we experienced and we observed. It can start all the way from just issues of lust because we were exposed to certain things as kids, as youth, and then all the way up through just being told certain things about ourselves and how we should be and how men should be, which may not have been biblical and just may not have been good advice, period. So that's what I want to talk about today, right? Why marriage is so hard, but how to really power through marriages and be the leader God has called you to be in marriage, because I do believe God has called men to be the leader of the home. Now, what does that even look like? And is that submission? I mean, what does that even entail? Is that, putting the wife down? And no, I don't think it's any of those reasons. I don't think you have to put the wife down or you have to put her under some, ungodly and, spiritual submission for it to be this thriving marriage, because that isn't thriving. That's submission, to subvert, and that's just not good. No bueno. But really, I think it starts when men really don't step up to the plate. We don't step up to that responsibility that God has put on us, right? He called us to be the head, right? And not the tail, right? He called us to be the head of that relationship. In Ephesians, I believe it's Ephesians 6, for husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave himself up for her to make her holy, clean, washed by cleansing of God's word. He did this to present her to himself as a glorious church, without spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. No one hates his own body, but feeds and cares for it as Christ cares for the church. And we are members of his body. So, right there, it just talks about the way we love our wives and the way we lead our wives. It's a reflection of how we love ourselves. And so again, that's why I said it goes to between the ears. It's ourselves. Sometimes we doubt ourselves and we have insecurities about how we're leading. And then when we act on those, or we act through some of those insecurities, and we do believe whether it's a good decision or not, and then we get criticized for those decisions, we take it very, very personally. And because we take it personally, it can then lead to lashing out in different ways, causing us to then suppress or just hurt our wives. because their criticisms, when our wives criticize us, it means the most because they have the most exposure to our hearts and our minds, right? We can get criticized by other people who may not necessarily have the relationship to us that our wives do to us, and have the insight into our hearts and our minds that our wives have to us. And so when we choose to lead and we choose to make decisions about how to lead our family and our wives, and just our overall family structure, and our wife criticizes it, or it turns out to be a bad decision and we get negative criticism that way, it then causes us to then be often as defensive. And I'm speaking from experience. When I'm leading my family and my decision may not have been the best and my wife criticizes me for it, it causes me to get very defensive. And that is a source of pride. That is an ego that just needs to be shut down. And when that happens, that's when I think the submission comes into play. We don't want to hear those criticisms. And I especially don't want to hear those criticisms of when I'm making a bad decision, because it's just tough to hear. It's tough to hear when you're making a bad decision and your wife's criticizing it. And I think that's where wives need to step in a different direction with their criticisms, not necessarily to be negative, but to reinforce that they believe in us, and to reinforce that they do believe that God has put in them the ability to lead, and He has called them to be our helpers, right? Not our criticizers. And that's the difference way back from Genesis, right? It talked about the wife is to be our helpmate, and Eve was called to be Adam's helpmate. And when they're criticizing us, it doesn't feel like help. It feels like you're kicking a man while he's down. And again, that just brings and wells up a lot of pride, and that comes up because we're trying to protect what little we have left after a bad decision. Now, it's easy to support your husband and feel supported when you make a good decision, when you get the promotion, when you land a new job, when your business starts succeeding. Now, in some cases, that becomes easy to support. It's like, oh yeah, I believed in you the whole time, which may be true, but those moments are easy. And but what can be hard in those moments is finding the thankfulness in it, the authenticity of thanking not just each other, husbands and spouse, because if a man is married while his business is succeeding, I believe that's in part to the wife supporting him and encouraging him to go in that way. In some cases, it's in spite of the wife's support or lack of support that the man then succeeds in whatever business, because maybe she didn't believe in him. But I do believe in most cases, it's actually the support of the wife and the encouragement of the wife where the man is able to then succeed, where she's handling other responsibilities, or they're both working and his business and her income is necessary for the elevation of that other business and the support of that business and its foundation. To be honest, that's what's happening a little bit in my marriage right now. Well, the wife's income is supporting the growth and building of the business that I'm doing. And it's a whole dynamic, and those things, and for that giant dynamic, in that it's a giant web where everything starts to get connected to everything else. And that's where women are just like, they have a buffet table, everything's on the table all the time, and they're thinking about everything all the time. For men, it's almost a one course meal where we get served and that's the meal at the time and that's what we focus on. So it's easy for us to compartmentalize and say, hey, well, you've had the salad, the dessert's not till later, or and we can compartmentalize things differently. So with those dynamics, as it continues to grow, as your relationships continue to deepen, and as you continue to live life, more things start to get connected to each other. So then that just reinforces the reason on why it gets difficult to then maintain a marriage. I mean, there's some stats that say anywhere between 40, 50, 60% of marriages are failing, depending on what statistic you look at. You can get pretty much whatever stat you want, but there is definitely the idea that marriage is hard. Why get married? More and more people, the younger generation coming up, is just not seeing the value in some cases of actually getting married, becoming one under God. Now, I see the validity in it. For me, there is a deep validity to coming into an agreement, into a covenant agreement, where your wife and your husband, wife and husband, they commit no matter what, in sickness and in health, till death do us part, for better or for worse. And they make that commitment. Now, there is a foundation of love and support that happens when you make the commitment under those vows, right? That's saying, and ultimately it's saying, for better or for worse, I will be married to you forever, and I will support you and encourage you forever, and I will, help you when you're sick, and I will love you through your tough times, and I will encourage you through depressions and anxiety, deep anxiety moments or moments of extreme anxiety, right? And that's the beauty of marriage. And we forget that. We so easily jump to, for riches, for health, for the better. And we hang to those and hope that the moment that they're in, when they first get married, that's the worst they'll ever be. And that's ultimately what we do believe. And that's in reality the truth, I believe, of what God has for us if we follow his plan. That will, for the most part, be the worst you will ever be in your marriage, not just financially, emotionally, or health, but what I'm talking about is spiritual growth. That is the worst, or the youngest you'll be spiritually in your growth. That is the most baby you will be in your spiritual growth. And if we focus on spiritual growth, then I do believe all other parts of our bodies, our mind, emotional, spirit, all those things will become better, and we can become better spouses and become better husbands if we focus on those things, right? Because yes, you may become unhealthy, but if you continue to focus on your spiritual growth with the Lord, you will, through your spirit, support your spouse when they are struggling, right? When they are physically struggling in their health, situations, you will be able to support them. And through those situations, you then get refined as a person. If your wife is struggling with sickness, whatever it may be, then through your relationship with the Lord, you will be refined to be more supportive of your wife. And through that long suffering, right, that God has called us to have, that we will be a better husband to our spouse. And, I know it's tough, if your wife is experiencing just, maybe cancer or just really extreme health crises in this moment. I do believe God is refining us through those times to become better people spiritually, right? And then there's just so many facets of that. And so that example of how we get refined and our willingness to be refined is again what attributes to marriage being so difficult. And it's hard to allow yourself to be refined because that is what God wants us to do, right? So in Hebrews 12, it's one of my favorite passages. It says, and we cast off all the sin that hinders us, and we focus on the prize that is Christ, because he is the perfecter of our faith. So if we focus on that, we become more perfect. Not that we become perfect, or we are being perfected, right? It goes back to being refined. So again, in our marriage circumstances, right, that men, we give up ourselves for our spouse. Now that doesn't mean, everything our wife asks for is then correct. We then submit all those things to the Lord, or everything our wife decides to do is then the best thing to do because we, love our spouse and, those things, those decisions of what you need to make for the family need to come and be submitted to the Lord, right? Because he orders our steps, but he does give us the desires of our heart, but he at the same time orders our steps. So as men, if we then submit those things, if we selflessly serve our spouse, which is extremely hard, especially if they're not being easy to love, if our wives aren't being easy to love, it then becomes hard to be selfless for her. But I do think through that selflessness, it breaks down her hard-heartedness. That's pretty hard to say, right? So through our selfless love, through our selfless actions and convictions, focusing on Christ, being refined through that process, I do think it breaks through to her heart, and it gets through to her in a way that no amount of verbal confrontation, no amount of "I told you so" could really do. No amount of income could break down her heart more than just serving her, right? Serving her through managing what finances you have, whether they be much or whether they be little. Loving her through, learning how to cook a meal, to offset what the many meals she cooks throughout the week. Or maybe you're the chef of the family and she loves that and you love cooking. So whatever the dynamics are, I think you understand what I'm talking about. Whatever area that may be bringing her just a great burden, it could potentially be hindering her ability to be more loving, right? And I think it's that awareness, that selfless awareness of what's going on in our family dynamic, right? Because let's just take this example. If we were leading a business, we make it our responsibility to be aware of all aspects of our business, right? The financial, the service side, sales side. We then become very intimately aware of what's going on in those things, and we do our best to find areas of improvement and alleviate those stress points or bottlenecks within all aspects of those business to help the business run more efficiently. And if we apply the same logic to our spouse, not that she's a business, but if we find areas to improve, not that we want to fix her, guys, I'm not talking about fixing our spouse, but if we just observe within her day and weeks and months of just whatever she has going on, if we can help alleviate some of the stress in her, what that speaks to her is that we are attentive and that we pay attention to what's going on in her world. And that is the selflessness, that we take time away from what we have going on as men and we pay attention to what's going on with our wives in a selfless way. That, I believe, is what the Lord has called us to do. So I've gone over a lot of different ideas and concepts on really just how to be a loving spouse, why marriage is hard, and those are just a few. I want to continue to bring content like this and insight like this. And so if you found value in this, please give me a like, subscribe to this channel. I plan to put out more of this, more husband talk based on biblical examples and just other real world experiences, sharing from what I'm experiencing in my life. And I hope it encourages you. So just wanted to put out this quick video. I hope you found value in it. Stay blessed and hope to talk to you soon. I'll put up another video sometime soon about a different topic. And if you have a topic that you would like me to cover, please let me know. Have a blessed one. Talk to you soon.